Welcome to today's Explainer. We're looking at a fundamentally shifting Indo-Pacific security architecture. Look, it's no secret to anyone in this room, the unipolar era we all grew up in, it's giving way to a highly contested, really fractured landscape. We're seeing massive military expansion on one hand and a rapid transition to networked collective defense on the other. For those of you advising regional governments, the mandate right now is absolutely critical. You have to formulate resilient, autonomous regional policies so that smaller states don't just end up as arenas for great power rivalry. Let's get right into it.
Here's the agenda for our briefing today. We're taking a bottom-line up-front approach. We're going to start with the macroeconomic realities and the trade-offs of military modernization, then move into diplomatic agility and tactical shifts. After that, we'll cover the often-ignored collateral damage to the ecology, and finally, wrap up with some concrete strategies for resilience.
All right, Section 1, Modernization and Budget Trade-offs. This is the macroeconomic reality of regional defense today. So this shift toward a collective defense model, it has completely catalyzed a competitive regional arms buildup. But here's the catch. It's happening during a highly volatile global economic period plagued by acute inflation. Just consider this staggering number, 96 billion Australian dollars. That is Australia's planned investment range over just the next decade for AUKUS Pillar 1, which is aimed at delivering a sovereign, conventionally armed, nuclear-powered attack sub. And to pull off a massive endeavor like that, the Australian Submarine Agency's budget is just ballooning. Their staffing alone is set to jump by 37%, hitting over 1,200 positions by the 2028-2029 fiscal year.
Now, for middle powers, concentrating capital like that forces some truly brutal structural trade-offs. To fund that high-end subsea dominance while simultaneously sustaining aging legacy fleets like the Collins-class submarines into the 2040s, which by the way costs up to $11 billion on its own, defense planners are having to make really painful cuts elsewhere. We're talking about the cancellation of a second regiment of self-propelled howitzers and a $1.4 billion reduction in uncrewed subsea systems. It's a massive balancing act just to maintain fiscal neutrality.
Meanwhile, there's a critical capability gap staring down many Southeast Asian littoral navies. They largely lack dedicated anti-air warfare platforms, which leaves them super vulnerable to high-volume, low-cost threats. Think attack drone swarms. To mitigate this, states like Singapore are putting highly concentrated investments into fifth-generation air power. By late 2026, Singapore is scheduled to get its first F-35B jump jets. And this isn't just about modernizing a fleet. It's about unparalleled interoperability. It aligns them perfectly with the F-35 fleets of Australia and Japan, essentially building this distributed, network-centric sensor node right across the region.
Moving on to Section 2, Diplomatic Agility, and how we are moving past gridlocked institutions.
We all know that broad, inclusive regional institutions, like ASEAN, for example, can sometimes face paralysis. Because of that, regional actors are maneuvering toward much more agile diplomatic frameworks. Which brings us to the real buzzword for today's briefing, minilateralism. Think of it as flexible, small-scale coalitions built around specific, shared strategic goals. Instead of getting bogged down in massive, slow-moving alliances where everyone has a veto, nations are forming these targeted partnerships. They're way more attractive for rapid operational deployments and, crucially, for maintaining strategic autonomy.
Let's look at how this plays out in the real world. A prime example is the Australia-Indonesia Treaty of Jakarta from February 2026. This is exactly what it looks like when middle powers choose smart consultation over rigid blocks. The treaty provisions don't just establish joint military training facilities, they literally integrate a senior Indonesian military officer directly within the Australian Defence Force. Plus, it strategically pairs security with economic resilience. There's a Memorandum of Understanding with Indonesia's sovereign wealth fund, Danatara, designed to boost investment in critical minerals and agriculture. It's the whole package.
Another fantastic example of this trend is the Squad. This brings together the US, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines. Now, contrast this with the broader Quad, which has occasionally hit friction points because of India's strategic autonomy and lack of direct treaty-linked military support. The Squad is entirely reliant on highly aligned U.S. treaty allies. Because of that, it operates as a highly coordinated maritime counterbalance, totally capable of joint patrols and swift, decisive action.
Section 3, Tactical Shifts. Let's talk about archipelagic defense doctrines.
As states realize they can't sustain conventional, threat-agnostic military buildups, they are operationalizing brand new doctrines tailored right to their specific geography to hold on to their sovereignty. The guiding philosophy across the board here is minimal deterrence.
Rather than trying to match the sheer military parity of great powers, which is basically impossible, littoral states are building just enough asymmetric denial capability to make any maritime incursion prohibitively costly. It's about raising the price of entry.
And we can see this minimal deterrence applied differently depending on the map. The Philippines has adopted the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, so they are heavily prioritizing coastal missile batteries and dispersed basing. Vietnam, on the other hand, relies on its famous four-nose doctrine, but with the modern depends clause, meaning they utilize mobile coastal defense and multi-directional hedging to carefully balance relations. Then you have Malaysia, which recognizes its geographic separation and utilizes a concentric deterrence posture for dual theater operations, putting their money into light combat aircraft and localized air defense. Every strategy is uniquely geographic, but they are all strategically unified in their purpose.
Pivoting now to Section 4, the ecological toll. This is the collateral damage of gray zone competition.
This collateral damage is, quite frankly, a massive blind spot for defense planners right now. The projections are absolutely staggering. Militarized land reclamation and artificial island building are devastating the marine environment. Reef ecosystems in these contested zones are declining by 16% per decade. That puts us on track for a projected 90% loss of regional coral reefs by 2050. The intensive securitization of this maritime space is literally paving over the foundation of the region's marine ecology.
And the knock-on effect on fisheries, just as catastrophic. We are looking at a 70 to 95% collapse in South China Sea fish stocks since the 1950s. Why is this happening? Because regional competition has practically weaponized the fisheries. Driven by competing territorial claims, nations are injecting an estimated $20 billion every single year into domestic fisheries subsidies. Those subsidized fleets are then pushed out into contested waters just to assert sovereign control. This forces industrial fleets to fish further down the food chain and aggressively pushes out the traditional coastal communities who rely on those waters.
But it goes beyond just fisheries. This gray zone harassment acutely targets littoral energy security too. We've seen some incredibly tense close-quarters intimidation tactics. We're talking about massive vessels passing within 200 yards of supply barges at Malaysia's Kasawari gas field. We've seen similar intense standoffs at Vietnam's Nam Con Son Basin. This isn't random. This is state-sponsored coercion, deliberately designed to pressure domestic power supplies while staying just barely below the threshold of kinetic conflict.
Finally, Section 5, Strategies for Resilience. Let's get into the actionable intelligence for your toolkits.
So how do states actually respond proactively? As policy advisors, here are 4 concrete recommendations to take back to your teams. 1. Double down on those asymmetric defense postures. Focus on mobile, ground-based systems rather than chasing incredibly expensive conventional parity. 2. Construct dense networks of bilateral treaties. You want to build operational trust without getting locked into rigid great power blocks. 3. Utilize civilian maritime law enforcement like coast guards to counter gray zone intimidation without automatically triggering a military escalation. And 4. Establish real, collaborative, regional resource management to address that ecological and fisheries collapse we were just looking at. Now, underpinning absolutely everything we've talked about today is the immense strategic vulnerability of geographic bottlenecks. Look at the Strait of Malacca. At its narrowest, it is a mere 2.7-kilometer passage. Yet that tiny stretch of water carries nearly 25% of global trade and a third of global petroleum deliveries. For nations like Indonesia that sit right astride these corridors, this is a profound geopolitical lever, yes, but it is also a massive, massive vulnerability. Because in any major crisis, this choke point instantly becomes the absolute center of gravity for great power pressure.
Which leads us to a final, profound strategic dilemma for everyone here. Is regional neutrality still tenable? If a major choke point crisis actually occurs, policies of strict non-alignment are going to face impossible pressure from external powers, all demanding either access or the outright denial of these vital sea lanes. As policy advisors, this is the hard question you need to take back to your capitals. Thank you for joining today's Explainer, and make sure to keep these strategic realities front and center in your future planning.